I want to make sure that we made an offer that will preserve those operating facilities and the communities and give hope to the people that are working there. And that's why I'm working very closely together with the labor movement, the United Steelworkers in particular, and with First Nations that we want to bring in as partners in this transaction, of preserving the operating facilities, because even if First Nations get a sizable portion of timber, then there would be no more market to sell it to because most of the mills will have gone. Hello, my name is John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink on a special BC forest industry in crisis mode. And the last one that we did was podcast number 310 on September the 11th. This is an update to that particular podcast. And this is podcast number on the Brink 317 called the update. And the update, and is the purpose of the update, is that we submitted to Canfor an LOI on the date was September the 9th with a proposal to acquire the 4 sawmills, the Polar sawmill, the Fort St. John sawmill, the Vanderhoof sawmill, and the sawmill in Houston. That included the volume of timber associated with those sawmills and the tenure, and then also the assets, the fixed assets, or the mills and all the equipment around it. So that LOI was sent to Canfor and received by Canfor. We had a number of discussions with Canfor around that period, both with their CEO, Don Kane, and a number of other executives in their organization, in particular Stephen Mackey and Ross Lennox. So what happened since that particular presentation and since our podcast of September the 11th? The next question is then the LOI spelled out what our proposal was to acquire those mills, but not only acquire the mills, but to find a way to keep those mills operating. So to make that particular acquisition effective on April the 1st, after Canfor has exited those particular mill sites, Fort St. John and Vanderhoof, and then at the same time, taking some time to do an evaluation of the mills, see what has to be done in terms of changes that we would have to make before we start the mills again. And then the other part, obviously, is part of our proposal, is that we want to add further manufacturing to all of those operations. For instance, Polar, we rely in Prince George heavily, and our value-added plants in Prince George, heavily on Polar volume. Unfortunately, that disappeared for a period, and then Canfor obviously made the announcement that they will no longer restart that mill. And then the other was then already the announcement of Houston, where we have a value-added manufacturing plant in Houston, Pleasant Valley Remanufacturing, where they were planning to add a new mill instead of the old one, and unfortunately that got canceled as well. So it left us in a very, very difficult position as our company, Brink Forest Products, that has been in business for the last 50 years, nearly 50 years actually, starting in 1975. And we built a lumber manufacturing, remanufacturing, and value-added manufacturing plant on the basis of adding value to the lumber manufactured by the other lumber mills. As I indicated, we have been in business for 50 years, never took handouts, no subsidies, nothing. Started from the ground up, 3 employees, and we have been very, very successful. And I believe we are one of the most successful value-added plants in BC. However, we are now potentially at risk. Hence, the proposal that we made, that it would not only sustain our operation, but it would further grow the value-added sector. So what we did then on September the 23rd, we submitted to Canfor the LOI with the offer, the price attached. How did we, in a very short, relatively short period, about a month and a half maybe, establish the price? Is that we agreed on a formula at which to prepare the price with the executives of Canfor. I'm not saying that they have accepted that, but that's the formula that we used. We also introduced, or we engaged, probably by far the most known expert in that field, Industrial Forest Service, that has been in business here for 50 years, is used by everybody, including Canfor, the government, and everybody else virtually globally, and that executive, Rob Schutz, to establish a price for the tenure of Canfor and the predictability in terms of volume and price. On the basis of that, we submitted to Canfor the LOI on the 23rd of September that included the price, and so there we are today. So far, we have not heard from Canfor. It's a bit uncommon. Usually when you present something like this, then you would expect a receipt or an acknowledgement that they received it, not accepted it necessarily, but at least that they received it. There are a lot of changes going on inside of Canfor. Obviously, the CEO is leaving and some other things that I have some challenges to figure out who exactly makes now the decisions. But on the other hand, I understand that the shareholders likely will be involved in a major transaction like this, and that is the Patterson Group, who own and control 51%. And in my world, if you control 51%, you're the ones that make the decision. So obviously, I have a deep respect for Jimmy Patterson, the principal and owner of the Patterson Group, and that I know from him credibility is immensely important. So is it to me. I've had several discussions with him in the past, and that obviously what is at stake here is we estimate close to 5,000 direct and indirect jobs. That first and foremost is critically important, I'm sure, in his mind. I also knew that we had to find a credible way of establishing price. And I know the offer in the LOI is ambitious, and maybe some people will say, well, how can Brink do that? Well, John Brink, me, has been in lumber business for 70 years, 60 in the Prince George in northern BC. I've been in the primary sector as well as in value-added manufacturing, and started those companies right from the ground up. I have the knowledge, I have the ability, and I will be successful in following it. But my business model will be different. Different in the sense that we will add more value, social and economic value, to the resource, that our primary manufacturing facilities, up to 50% of their volume, will go up the value chain. 25% of the higher grades will go up the value chain, and 25% of the lower volume will go up the value chain. So the question maybe should be, is okay, so why are you not doing that now? Well, unfortunately, probably in the last 20 years, the industry, the primary industry in British Columbia, for reasons likely related to softwood lumber and potentially quota issues, is that have decided to send most of the lower quality, the bottom 20%, to China. That has affected our company and many other ones extremely adversely. Our remanufacturing facility closed the door on April the 1st, 2005, and has not reopened since. Our finger joint plants in all locations, in Prince George, Vanderhoof, and in Houston, are running at 50% capacity. Although we are still trying to acquire low-grade lumber, the bottom 20%, but unfortunately, and again, we are now at the point that it involves a bit more of reality. What is the real reason? And I'm going to be blunt about it because everything is at stake for us and I believe for the forest industry in British Columbia. So for Brink to acquire low-grade lumber at market prices, even from the mills in our neighborhood, maybe Dunkley, maybe Carrier, maybe Sinclair, including Canfor, has been extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the last 20 years. Is that because you're not paying the price? No, we pay better than the price. So what is then the reason? It is likely to do with softwood lumber or directions from COFI, the Council of Forest Industry, or the BC Export Market Association, in some form or fashion. So what would then happen if Canfor accepted a deal like this or didn't accept it? I believe that based on the past, the likelihood what would happen is they would sell the tenure to others. I know the Chinese are looking at it very strongly, and other parties look at it strongly. Would that mean the mills would keep running? No. Usually what happens in cases like that, you get the highest possible price for the tenure. And then what they did in the past, they take the mill apart, ship it to the US or some other places. I want to make sure that we made an offer that will preserve those operating facilities in the communities and give hope to the people that are working there. And that's why I'm working very closely together with the labor movement, the United Steelworkers in particular, and with First Nations that we want to bring in as partners in this transaction of preserving the operating facilities, because even if First Nations get a sizable portion of timber, then there would be no more market to sell it to because most of the mills will have gone. And then I believe, to be very blunt about it, that if that happened, before you will find other investment to build sawmill facilities, planer facilities, that it would take a long, long time before that would happen, maybe even a generation. I think this is the time of where it becomes the road not taken, where politicians, labor, First Nations must stand up, in particular politicians, because we have an election here on October the 19th, that must stand up and say, no, we will preserve the jobs, we have the timber, let's fix the system so that those operations can operate. And if there is something wrong with the model, my model is, as I indicated, of the 100% of the lumber manufactured, 50% will go up the value chain in the region where it is, the mills are and where it is manufactured. Appurtency, the concept of operating primary capacity in the region, in my mind, is critically important. That was eliminated, unfortunately, by the previous government, BC Liberals, in fact, that early in 2000, 2001, 2002, dramatically changed the forest policy that eliminated fiber flowing to value-added manufacturers. As a result, there virtually is no more secondary manufacturers. The other part is appertency, or the concept of appertency. And then the other part is stimulating selling more lumber into China. And that appeared to be a good idea. However, with all due respect to our friends in China, they are very, very smart, and they are interested in low grades only because they're not building houses like us. So they bought virtually all the low grades that used to be used by secondary manufacturers in the province of British Columbia and moved it into China, sent it back to us, to Costco, as for all intents and purposes furniture. I'm not happy about the things that are happening. I'm not happy, with all due respect to Jamie Patterson and the Canfor executive, of the lack of reaction that we have had so far, or the cooperation. I believe that the public in BC has to stand up, because at the end of the day, the timber in the province of British Columbia belongs to you and me, the people. And that with the privilege of access to timber goes the notion of a social contract. I'm kind of sure that we have forgotten about that in some cases. I think, again, that I believe communities, politicians must stand up and saying, no, we want to manufacture in this province. The concern about other companies not having enough fiber, both Dunkley, Carrier, and Sinclair have sufficient volume that they have either in tenure or that they buy in the open market to operate their operations. And so with Brink, if these mills are sold or taken down and sent into the States and do not operate, and the timber goes to the other operations that for the last 20 years have sent all their low grades into China, then not only will Brink not survive in these companies, all our employees will not be employed, and the other 5,000 affected by this transaction will no longer have employment. But it will, in my mind, take a generation before we bring the infrastructure back to BC to show again that there is potential and future in the forest industry. So as I'm now doing this update, I wanted to be open about it. Some people may not be happy about it, what I have said, but that's how I feel about it. So with Canfor, in terms of the volume of timber attached to this transaction, is about 3.3 million cubic meters collectively in all the regions where the sawmills are located, and that's attached to it now. Even then, Canfor still will have close to 2.8 million cubic meters of timber left over, although they will only have one sawmill left, that is the PG saw. That needs about a third of that to operate, in my opinion. So they still have lots of timber to sell to others if that's what they wish to do. I want to make sure that everybody understands. I'm not being critical of the Patterson Group, or for that matter, Jamie Patterson. I know his heart is in the right place. He wants to first and foremost preserve jobs. This is not about selling timber at the highest price by putting it up for bid, and at the same time recognize that for me, in the last 50 years, it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about our employees that have worked with us for 50 years, that I believe deeply. I love this province. I love the industry. But this is the time that the people of this province, the politicians in this province, and the First Nations have to stand up and say, no, we know not going in that direction. But all our jobs are hanging in the balance today on the basis, in my opinion, of this decision. I went out of my way to offer them a fair price, and the formula that they agreed on would be usable. And so I don't, with all due respect to my friends in China that take all our low grades and have for the last 20 years, where we had to shut down secondary manufacturing in the province, that they would love to have more of our lumber, not the high grades, but in particular low grades, and that they are now interested in acquiring not only our timber rights, but also the infrastructure that may go with it, the ones that they want. But the 4 mills likely that we want to purchase will be taken down and sent elsewhere, because that has been the modus operandi. So this transaction is not a question that it leaves Canfor with no timber. Canfor has, in the province of British Columbia, 7.7 million cubic meters, and is by far the largest tenure holder in the province. I would urge, with all due respect, my friends at the Patterson Group and at Canfor, let's see what can we do together to at this critical point in history for the province of British Columbia and for the forest industry that has been the economic driver in the province of British Columbia, that used to employ 180,000 persons and is now down to less than half of that. How can we turn this around? And working closely with First Nations and labor, and that's where I want to go, and that is exactly what I would like to do, but I cannot do it alone. I need support from the public in saying, no, this is the time that we have to make a decision. So, this is my update. I hope when Canfor can find the time, I understand they're going through a lot of changes internally, and I understand that we can give comfort to those employees that were attached to Polar and in Bear Lake, and the ones in Fort St. John's, the ones in Vanderhoof, and the ones that used to work in Houston, that we can give them comfort that we will try everything that we can to restart our operations in a new model where a pertinency will be recognized and that we go up the value chain, not just making 2x4s that apparently nobody wants right now, but that up to 50% of the products go up the value chain. That's the model that I've been advocating for many, many, many years. And at 83, I'm not going to sit back quietly and see this ship sink. I'm not going to do that. And if some people may not appreciate that, that would be very unfortunate. I would hope that the Patterson Group, who ultimately will make the decision on these issues, I know Jimmy is a hands-on man, so am I. And so that they say, okay, let's first and foremost make sure we preserve the jobs of the people that committed to us in those areas. Let's work with Brink in saying, how can we change direction rather than selling everything to the Chinese? And I say that with respect. But it's our province, it's our timber, and I say add the greatest amount of social and economic benefit we can in this province. Thank you very much.